week my 4th and 5th graders have been working on centers, and so I thought it might be fun to chit chat about how I break them into groups. I kind of had 2 different ways and a couple of tips for you. So if you're an elementary music teacher and you want to do centers, you're not sure how to group your kiddos, then this is the video for you. If we haven't met before, hi, I'm Becca. I'm an elementary music teacher, and here on this channel we talk all things elementary music. I love using centers in particular, and so down below I'm going to link to a 12-page list of ideas that you can do in your classroom, for most of them for free, that you can use for centers, and they go by type. So it's like instrument ideas and rhythm ideas and solfege ideas, and there's also some links in there to some other freebies, so definitely make sure that you go check that out. I will leave it linked below, and let's get started. Okay, so first off, I have some tips for you when it comes to breaking kids into centers. First of all, you got to make sure you have like the right number of centers. There's kind of a sweet spot with kids. I find if you have more than 6 kids in a group, it's like a little bit too big, and if you have 2 or 3, it can be like awkwardly not enough. So you want to make sure that you're dividing your class into enough centers that it kind of makes sense and works. For years and years and years, I did always 3 centers, and I would have 2 sets of them. So I would have 6 stations set up, but 2 of them would be the same, so that way my groups could be a little bit smaller, and that worked really, really well. This week what I've been doing is I have had 4 centers. I don't like it as much because I feel like we are a little bit rushed, but as long as the kids come on time and we really stick to our timers, 4 centers has been fine. And then we have a slightly bigger groups, but it's been okay so far. So the first tip is just make sure that you are accommodating your students. You kind of want to be like between 3 and 6 kids, and the less students in a center, the calmer it's going to be. So, just keep that in mind. Number 2 is always adjust your roster once you get them figured out. Once you get your kids into their groups, you are probably going to have at least 2 kids who should not be near each other. So do not feel weird about moving them into different groups, even if you have them differentiated and that means you're moving someone to a group they don't need to be in. It is more important that this runs smoothly than it is to make sure they're in like the right level. So just go ahead and move them if they need to be moved, because it's either that or you're going to stress about them the whole time, right? Right. And number 3 is never, ever group the kids in front of them. The worst thing you can do is sit down and be like, okay, you go here, you go there, because you're going to end up with kids who don't need to be next to each other. It's not very thoughtful. And kids are going to be rude about it. If you can just read off a list, be like, all right, these kids go in there, then they're a lot less likely to be rude about who they're going to be in a group with, or be rude about where they're going. Cause there's always some centers that are more fun than others. And so you get kids who are like, oh, I don't want to, whatever. But I always tell them we're going to go to everything as long as we're, packing up quickly, and that we're respectful to our groups, and their class points depend on that. So those are a couple of things to just kind of bear in mind as we put our students into centers. And next up, let's talk about how I group them. Now, I have kind of 2 different ways that I group the kiddos, and it kind of depends on what I'm trying to get out of said centers. So on the one hand, if I am doing small groups, I'm going to run a small group, and I'm really trying to make sure that we are all understanding a concept, especially if it's a more difficult concept. Maybe if some of us are struggling and I want to make sure that like we're all getting it, then I'm going to want to have differentiated centers. If I'm doing differentiated centers, then what I'm going to do is I will use some kind of quiz or test or, whatever to figure out where the kids need to be. So this could be an exit ticket that you grade really quickly, and you sort the kids by, who got every question right, who got some of the questions right, and who barely got any of the questions right. And there's your 3 groups there. Or, break up the biggest one into 2, and that can be 4. Or if there's 2 that are small, you can combine them, so on and so forth. Or what I like to do is ask questions at the end of class, which I write down on my seating chart. So just on my seating chart, I have these little like checks, and I will, have like a question on the board. So like right now we're working on a meter. Up on the board, there's some rhythms. I say, show me on your fingers how many beats are on this slide. And then I can see who is understanding that. And I always tell them put it down here so only I can see, but that gives me a really good idea of who is able to figure out how many beats we have, and different things like that. I'm going to read a rhythm, show me if it's 1 or 2, or we're doing dictation and I'm writing down who's getting them right or not. And then I'm going to break them into groups from there so that I have students who are getting everything right, some of the things right, some like less things right, no things right, and so on and so forth, just depending on the class, because you know, it might be skewed one way or the other. So that's number one, is if you're doing differentiation. Now, one more thing about differentiation, and that is the order that you do your centers in. If you have differentiated centers and you have a teacher group, then my suggestion is to have the teacher group, the like lowest group that needs the most help, go to the teacher group first. So that way it is fresh in their mind what we're working on, and they have like a little bit of extra knowledge going into everything else. So typically I will have my centers laid out in a way that the teacher group is my students who need the most help. And then my students who need the least amount of help are gonna go to the hardest center first, and they're gonna end with me. So it's kind of like me and then like hardest center, and they're kind of going around that way. So that way the students who are like maybe in the middle can also get, you know, they go past me to get to that harder center or things like that, or at least they've warmed themselves up with like a game or something, so that way they're a little bit more prepared once they get to that hard center. So that takes like an extra level of thinking, but if you're doing differentiated centers, I highly recommend you like think through when someone is going to something, because if they need help, they need help like ASAP. Otherwise, the other centers are not going to be as helpful, right? Right. Now, if instead you are doing centers that are a little more independent, so for example, the week that I'm filming this is Halloween week, and we have a first grade concert. So between the choir festival I attended last week, the first grade concert I have this week, and the fact that it's Halloween and dress down days every day, the kids are crazy, and I knew they were going to be crazy, and I didn't want to try to teach them, essentially. Like I was like, I'm not standing up there and talking. We're not doing lectures. No. So everybody is either doing like lots of really active like dances and stuff like that, or, you know, scarf activities, or we're doing like centers where they can work, so that way during those classes, so like that's what 4th and 5th grade are doing. They're doing centers, they're working, and it gives me a chance to like get a little bit caught up because I have so much stuff to do. So in that case, I am not necessarily standing like over top of them. I am hanging out next to one of the groups, and I am keeping an eye on them, and I'm kind of watching them. And then I have a group with something to turn in. I always recommend having something to turn in. If you're doing centers, you should definitely have something that's graded. And I'm watching them, but I'm not like running a small group, essentially, this time around, and next time it might be different. So if I am not running a small group, then instead of differentiating them into levels where I have like the students who are doing really well and the students who, you know, need some help, if I'm doing them where I'm expecting the kids to work more independently, then I will do mixed groups. So instead of, you know, everyone who's getting all the answers right, I'm going to pick one kid who's getting all the answers right, one kid who's getting some of the answers right, and, you know, one kid who needs a little bit of help. And that way the kids who are understanding can kind of help out the kids who maybe don't understand what we're doing right now, and they can help each other. And that really makes a center run smoothly, as long as they're kind about it and respectful about it. But if you can group the students in a way that works that way, they can help each other out, and they can figure things out themselves without you having to necessarily step in. So I'm thinking specifically about one game we've been playing, which is Music War. Love a good war game. It's fun. It's based off the actual card game War, which is why it's called War. I wouldn't have just picked that name. But basically what happens is all the kids get, I usually have them get 10 cards. They flip over the top one. Whoever has the most beats on their card is the winner. And so this is a really fun game for the kids to understand beats and meter and all that kind of stuff, and they love it. It is a fan favorite in my classroom. I will link it down below. I also have a version for treble clef and a version for bass clef where it's like the higher the note, and I have a dynamic one. So if you're working on any of those, it's there. They love it. It's so much fun. So along with that, I often have kids who, you know, it's like, oh wait, how many beats is this? Oh, this is 2 beats. No, it's 3 beats. And, you know, those kind of things. And so if you have students who actually like know the answers in every group, they can help facilitate figuring out the answers and figuring out, you know, if that is right or if it's not right. I also, by the way, will usually put that center near the chart that has how many beats everything is, so that way if there is a question, they can look at the chart on the wall. That's fine with me. But just having students that know their stuff in every center can really help the students be more independent. Now, if you're doing differentiated centers, I wouldn't do that because then you don't get that differentiation because you've got a mixed group. But if you're doing centers where you want the kids to like work independently, that's kind of where the magic is. Okay, so in my room, I usually will have some kind of thing where I test them, and then I will make different versions of centers. So usually I have two. Here's my version of, you know, differentiated centers, and here's my version of if I want the kids to just work and get things done so that I can get things done and sit down. Sitting down is such a luxury, so we love that. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit about how I organize my students. Again, I adjust them based on behavior and other things like that, but that's kind of the two ways that I do this. And just like I mentioned, even if you're just gonna like go down the row and pick the first 5 kids, like decide before they're staring at you who's going where, so that way you're not stressed about it. Okay. Thanks so much for watching, and if you hit that subscribe button, I will see you in the next one. Bye.